baseball emporium, which was down here on Baltimore Street. And according to William Ridgely Griffith, who wrote a book on early baseball in Maryland, like 1858 to 1871, he said that Grattan sent a salesman out the length and breadth of Maryland in 1866. And that's when you start seeing these little notices in local papers to come out for a baseball team. And there weren't any names associated with it. I think that's sort of the style today, but some towns responded. The only town that really responded was Chestertown. And they started all these teams, and they started playing, played from September, December, and that was it. And then the following spring, there were more announcements, and there were more teams forming. And then when the Baltimore Baseball Convention met in 1867, for the first time it included teams from outside of Baltimore area. So you had teams from Frederick, Hagerstown, Cumberland, teams from the Eastern Shore, they all joined. And that was new. And it was in 1867 that, I don't know how many teams formed. That's when everything just kind of took over. It was a big fad is what it was. And it goes from, you go from zero in the local papers to all this activity. That's all they're writing about is baseball and railroads, it seemed like. And Grattan was the leader in that. Him and his salesman, they were out to make money. Turns out Grattan wasn't too much of a businessman there because he had opened a book and card mart here in Baltimore and did estate sales. He had the baseball emporium. But within a year, I think, of opening the emporium, there were all these suits filed in the newspapers and owed money. So that was his contribution. As fleeting as it was, without him, baseball had gotten there a little bit much slower. So Grattan was somebody from around here that really got things started. One of the first games that I came across that featured a Baltimore team and Eastern Shore team was in 1874. Went to Druids of Baltimore, came over on Steamboat, Massachusetts to St. Michael's and to play a game on Canton Field. And that was a big event. It was even covered in the Baltimore paper. Some papers covered it as well, some local papers. And I don't know if that was the first time it happened, but it was certainly the first time I came across.
Who were these players? They weren't college players.
No, it was everybody and their brothers. When baseball first got there, everybody played. And in fact, on the Eastern Shore, it's kind of amazing. And I'm sure it's the same in other rural areas where, if somebody from, say, Brooklyn moved to Cleveland, to better himself, make his fortune, and he wanted to keep playing baseball, he had a town of 30,000 people to convince, to play. But when baseball came to these rural areas, you didn't have those population bases. I found teams at Crossroads and Railroad Depot, basically, there was nothing there, but that district, they would form a team of, well, actually they formed clubs, on the Knickerbocker line, where, it wasn't quite as competitive. You had a club and played amongst each other. You needed a minimum of 20 players for a club. You really needed 30 or 40. That's what I've seen. So it's kind of amazing how people just came out of the woodwork or out of the trees and the fields and just started teams. But you needed everybody willing to play. And so yeah, most of the players at this point are just guys down the road learning how to play. Now that would change by the 1880s. There's more activity, and it's kind of a one-way street. Everybody's coming from Baltimore or the Western Shore to Eastern Shore play. It rarely goes the other way. But in the 1880s, you had a lot of teams coming over here, like the Butchers of Baltimore, Maryland Club at Towson coming over, and they were considered amateur. They called themselves amateur, as did the Eastern Shore teams, but they really weren't. You know, everybody was bringing in players by that point, by the 1880s. All the little towns were starting to bring in professional players, as were the Baltimores, Sunday teams, and they would come down and play. And the only way you knew about professional players early on was the losers, which I'm sure the newspapers were whining about losing. But then by the early 1890s, they kind of threw all that aside because baseball was just too popular. So professionalism came at an unusual place, openly, and that was Washington College. They had agreed to join the Maryland Intercollegiate Athletic Association, so they had to play all the other colleges in Maryland, and everybody was doing it, so they just kind of said, "Oh, we don't care if everybody knows we've got professional players." In fact, we went out and got a guy named Dave Zierfalls, who was 25 years old, and all called professionally. He played there 4 years, got a degree, and then went back to professional baseball. So by the 1890s, there was a sort of real vibrant exchange between Western Shore and Eastern Shore teams coming over to play, and the quality improved greatly. And the environment was so totally independent, and there were no restrictions, and you could see anybody on a baseball field. You might see a major league player coming over to make money. Buck Herzog did that in the early 1800s. One of the better teams from around here were the Starlights, and they claimed the championship of Maryland based on beating the Orioles in the exhibition game. And then they sent out a challenge, which was unusual. Usually, if you claimed the championship, you wanted to go run it high and not play anybody else. Just claim it. They sent out challenges, so Salisbury took them up. And they came over and they got beat. And they conceded that Salisbury was a good team. And the Starlight had a third baseman named Jack Dunn. I've not been able to confirm, but the Jack Dunn from here in Baltimore, well, obviously he's from Baltimore, but I'm not sure it's the same Jack Dunn. I couldn't verify that. But, it was a good team. So there was another team from here called the Browns. They thought they were better than the Starlights, so they came over and they got beat. And then Salisbury got a little cocky and said, "Okay, we'll just take on the Orioles, have done with it, we'll be the best." The Orioles weren't banking on that. They tried to lure them with a train trip to Ocean City, but that didn't work either. And it figures because go over there and play, and go to Ocean City, and come back to Baltimore, it's at least 2 days, if not 3.
Now, what years would?
This is 1896.
Okay, so it wasn't that Hamlin Orioles they're talking about.
Yeah, it's Hamlin Orioles.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where did they get the Oriole? Who came up with the Oriole name?
My understanding is the Orioles, it was like the Elks, Kiwanis, a benevolent organization, and they were involved in building one of the fields for the American Association. One of the guys that was heading up building the field was an Oriole, and it was an association. I don't know how detailed that was, but the newspapers took to call them the Orioles. As far as I know, that's what out here. I don't know if you know any
other origin.
There was also
The festival.
there was some kind of
Yes.
festival in
Yes, there
the
was always be a festival.
the festival,
Yes.
and it was called the Oriole Festival,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that was in the 1880s, I think it was.
Remember that poster that one of the
Yes.
guys showed
Oh,
us?
David Stinson showed us.
It's
Yes.
not named
Yeah,
after a
that-
bird, it's named after a benevolent club.
Yeah.
Right, but the bird was also a local thing. You know, it's the state bird of Maryland.
Is it?
Yeah. So it's just always been identified.
That's where they got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the name came.
So, because most clubs, if you go way back, some of the older baseball professional clubs, the names changed. Like the Cubs and the Braves are the two oldest
Mm-hmm.
professional things, going back to 1876, the original founding of the National League. The Cubs were the Colts and the Orphans and
Mhm.
the White Stockings and this and that, and then eventually, Cubs by the early 1900s. And then the Braves were a whole bunch of other names, the Bean Eaters and this, that, and when they were started in Boston.
Yeah,
So-
a lot of those clubs went through so many different nicknames. You didn't stick with a nickname. You might have a nickname for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and if the media started calling you something else in the fan
Something
circle,
else and it sticks.
the Philadelphia was the Quakers,
Yes.
because that was part of the William Penn and everything, and there was nothing trademarked or anything back then, so you weren't like locked into anything.
Even in the 40s, the Phillies used Blue Jays for about 2 years. In the mid-40s.
Yeah, I know they put the Blue Jay on the
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
Yankees too.
Yankees were the Highlanders originally.
Highlanders. Yes.
And nobody knows where the Yankee came from. That's lost.
Was it St. Louis the Perfectos too?
Somebody, well, I'm not sure.
There was the Brooklyn Superbas. I mean, some of the names are
The
like
Brooklyn Bridegrooms
The
also,
Brooklyn Bridegrooms.
and the Superbas.
names. The names have been really radically. Not everything's locked in, obviously, with
There was
trademarks.
also Baltimore
And-
Canaries.
Yes.
Yeah,
This one, too.
maybe this city has an obsession with birds. I don't know.
Well, that Oriole Festival poster was more yellow than orange. If I remember.
It also might have faded since the 1800s. So.
Yeah. So, the 1890s baseball started to get even better and better, and one of the teams that came over from Baltimore to play were the Yanigans, which were actually composed of 3 or 4 Oriole reserve players. They kept kind of like a taxi squad in those years, because if you needed a player, he had farmed out 200 miles away, he might take you a week to get him. So they kept 3 or 4 players around, surround them with some other professional players, and they would just go around and play people. They would go up in Pennsylvania, or they would come over to Eastern Shore on the tour, and and drum up a lot of enthusiasm from seeing real players. And they walked off the field at Chestertown one time because they thought they were getting ready to lose the game, and they didn't want to risk that. So,
They didn't want to work.
they didn't want to risk losing
Oh,
the game.
okay.
And you had that happen. There was another tough one, and I was talking about the Starlight. Salisbury ended up setting a game series with Cambridge. And Cambridge actually came over here and tried to sign some of the Orioles individually to come over and play. Tried to get Joe Corbett, and Corbett said, I'm scheduled to pitch, I can't do it. He didn't say he didn't want to do it, he said, I can't do it. So then they went to a guy named Dan Clarkson, who must have been on the taxi squad or something, but I don't think he was actually on the roster. And he said, there's no way we can excuse that. So, but they were a good team. And by that time, more and more players were coming from all over the country actually to play. You had people coming down to Philadelphia, and a lot of guys started coming over from Baltimore.
Did any Negro League teams play there?
Yes, quite a few.
Okay.
I only came across one in the 1920s, 1925. It was a game, the Harrisburg Senators with Oscar Charleston, which was called the tie-com of the day, and the Baltimore Black Sox with Jeff Wilson. And they played a series, and I was fortunate enough to find the box scores for that in most papers anywhere, you'd see an announcement for the games, so everybody would know. And then you'd have the coverage of the game afterwards. You know, they advertise, you know, so-and-so's going to be coming out. But then in the 1930s, you had Joe Cambria came over. He held the franchise in Salisbury at the time. And Cambria, as you probably know, worked here at the Bugle, coat, apron cut, and he part owner of the Black Sox, I think, at one point. And he came over, even though I found no smoking gun, there seems to be all these exhibition games from all over the Negro Leagues. All the best teams were coming over. You know, you had Satchel Paige, you had Josh Gibson, and all those guys. And actually in 1939, there was no Negro League World Series, but two of the better teams, I think, from the Eastern Colored League played in a series, and they advertised their bill as the Negro League World Series, and the final games played in Delaware. It wasn't a World Series, but they were going to tell people that to get people there. So yeah, there was a lot of activity. Actually, when I was writing the book, I found that there were a lot of guys from the Eastern Shore of Maryland that actually played in the Negro Leagues. Kent County in Maryland, Salisbury, little places like Preston and other areas. Some of them, you know, it wasn't just a few games, but some of these guys played like 14 years, 12 years, you know, had significant Negro League careers. So Cambria was an interesting individual. He had his association with the Negro Leagues. He was able to learn about what they call the Cuban connection, which was a pipeline of the Negro Leagues. But he saw there was plenty of guys that were Anglo descent for, could pass for it, so he started signing them up. And most of these guys were pretty good, a little older maybe than some other guys. And he had a team in Trenton, and he'd shuttle players back and forth from Salisbury to Trenton, depending on his needs. And it's a fascinating story because that year they jumped out to a 21-5 record. The season was about over. I mean, a 97-game season, and they did 21-5. And then people were a little disgruntled, and somebody turned them in for an evening player, which everybody did. And they forfeited all the games. So they were 0-26, and they won the pennant. They played 6-15 all in the season, starting out at 26. Which is pretty remarkable. And it was, you know, it struck so many people. They even Griffith came over and gave them jeweled wristwatches and stuff. And the manager won the minor league rookie of the year. Sporting News was all out of the Eastern Shore. And Cambria's reward for that was what they called the alien rule. They included a bylaw that said if you weren't a citizen of the United States, you couldn't play in the Eastern Shore. So that was never put in the book itself. I've seen the rule book. It's not in it, but it's in the newspapers. And actually, two players quit in 1938, the following year, because they just had enough. Every time, they would let them keep a couple players that were Latin origin, but you know, it was all under scrutiny. So, but the fact that they won. In the early 1900s, like I said, a lot of players were coming over to Baltimore, and making a name for himself. One of them was Bob Lindblom. I mentioned him, but I already. He grew up 2 blocks from Oriole Park here, and you got the 1890s version. And he was a member of the Knot Hole Gang, and he worked his way up the bat boy, and he was the mascot. So he literally learned how to play baseball. John McGraw, Willie Keeler, and all those guys. You know, just practiced with him. And one day, a guy came up to him and said, "Bob, how'd you like to go to college?" He said, "Well, I'd rather play baseball." And he said, "Well, you understand, we'll pay you $45 a month to play. And if you want to, we're not going to force you, but if you want to, you can go to class, you can go to college." He said, "Okay, do that." The funny, he did that under a assumed name, Bob Alexander, which was his middle name. And then in 1897, which is the only year I could find him, he played on the Eastern Shore. He came over. He kind of set the template for how most players went about it. He played for Washington College, even though he was playing at the University of Maryland. He played for Chestertown, he played for Walton, he played for Cambridge, Fredericksburg, he played for Crisfield, which is where he met his wife. You know, so one year, that's 6 teams I found him on. God knows how many teams he played for. Somebody waved money at him and go. And that was pretty typical after that. Even though some guys apparently signed season contracts, like Buck Herzog did with Ridgely. He was playing at the University of Maryland. He was playing. A lot of these college guys got summer jobs playing ball, you know, town teams. And Herzog was one of them. And he's the one that Homer Baker always credited with moving him to third base. Before that, he was a pitcher in the outfield. Wasn't getting a whole lot of playing time. Another one came over to the Baltimore was Maddox. He didn't play too long in Major Leagues. He won 24 games one year, pitched for the Pirates in the World Series, as did Sam Flock from here. And significant careers. Simon Nichols, another one. He actually signed a contract, I guess, out of high school in 1903 with Detroit. A lot of times back then, you'd sign these guys out of high school or out of town ball and just throw them to the Wolves in September. And that's what he did. And Nichols' parents found out and said, "No, you can't play professional baseball." Not Marty was, you know. And so he promised he would never do it, but he came to the Eastern Shore and he was playing for a bunch of teams. He kind of followed Herzog a little bit. So one of the later players from Baltimore that came over was Eddie Long, pitcher. And he was the early knuckleballer, I guess. And so a lot of guys came over. One of the things that always amazed me was how quickly they went from playing town ball to the major leagues. Within 2 years, a lot of these guys were starting in the major leagues. That's what happened to Baker. In 1907, he was playing for Cambridge. In 1909, he was playing third base on the back. Si Nichols did the same thing. In 1905, he was in Pocono City, and then 2 years later, he started shortstop. Maddox was the same way. He actually has a baseball card, backup card, and some of them on the back come side where he played for it. It says East American. You know, it was not a league team, it was just a town team. So there was plenty of talent coming over. And like I said, the jump was not that great quality. And
Where do these ballparks still exist on the Eastern Shore?
That's a good question. I don't think any of them do. I know where a lot of them were. Actually, one that was built for the minor leagues in 1920 is still Cambridge. but most of them, uh, you know, the ballparks they use now, everything's kind of moved. Yeah, well, actually, I have a picture of, they used to do these postcards back in the day of town teams or whatever, or picture of the ball field with players on. Like, panoramic field, yes. And those fields are surrounded with cornfields. And there's a couple of funny stories about it. Cambridge had, their field was on Oakley Street. Annie Oakley had just moved there. So they named the street after her. The field was on Oakley Street. And they had the cornfield around it, but they also, the backstop, the backstop was the Choptank River. So they had to have a boat brigade, called the boat brigade. And they had bathing suits, and they had boats, and at the time the foul ball went out in the river, they'd go get it and throw it back into play. So adds new meaning to the dead ball era. That's pushing the balls out of the water all the time. And in Chrisfield, the Nebraska Indians had come to town. And I guess the field again, they all seemed to be surrounded by the cornfield. And all these people were trying to sneak in through the cornfield and climb the fence. And the manager of the Nebraska Indians, Johnny Green, said, "You don't stop them, we're not going to play." And he said, "Well, we can't stop them." He said, "Well, we're not playing." So that was that. But yeah, you had barnstorming teams coming through. And like the Nebraska Indians or the Cherokee Nationals, Nelson on them out. You had Hawaiian Nationals, you had House David later came along. You had all-star teams, all kinds of activity.
Did they just play in Maryland, or did they play in Delaware and Virginia?
Well, yeah, both. It kind of depended where you were. If you're down in Salisbury or closer to Delaware border or short Virginia, then yeah, you were doing that. But once you got a little further north, say Cambridge, you were less likely. You were more likely to play mostly American schools. But yeah, and then you had teams, like I said, coming from Baltimore. And sometimes farther away. There was a team called the Madison Squares from New York. You also had women's teams that would pop in. And in fact, one team beat the Cambridge team. They said, "We're not coming back on the return leg unless you get a better team." Which says something. Cambridge is playing the field at the time. But yeah, it's sort of fascinating, at least to me. Another guy that of interest that was from Baltimore was Art Ellers. You know him, yeah. He was interesting. He got signed by Connie Mack, but he didn't go into baseball. He joined the Army because a lot of people anticipated that. And he was a machine gunner, and he got shot 2 slugs, I think, in his pitching arm, which ended that career. But he also took a lot of shrapnel in his legs, so he was in bed for 2 years, and 2 years on crutches. But by the 1930s, he was active in baseball any way he could get it, and he bought the franchise for Pokemon. And he did that for a few years, struggled with that, and then he went to the bi-state league as secretary. He just started working his way up the ladder. He got a job with Connie Mack in minor leagues, and then he ended up as general manager. He ended up general, I think, the first Oriole general manager.
Yep, he was. He signed Brooks Robinson.
Yeah. And Jimmy Dykes, who was the first manager, actually played in Seaford in 1961, along with Joe Bowles. There's plenty of Baltimore connections to baseball. One last guy, I guess, I want to talk about, as far as the Baltimore connections go, is C. Edward Sparrow, who was the editor of the Sunbakers. And he and a guy named Jameson were responsible for bringing Class D minor leagues to the Eastern Shore. That they arranged a tournament between the Class D Blue Ridge League and the chaotic, independent Eastern Shore, and he managed to put it together. And what happened was the Eastern Shore teams outdrew Frederick by double, and they made twice as much money. And then somebody pointed out Frederick had made $4,000 on the year, so everybody's like, oh yeah, we gotta have a league now. Before you couldn't get people in the league. So now they wanted the league, but they didn't know what they wanted. Independent, organized baseball, something in between. And then finally, Jameson and Sparrow would go around the Chamber of Commerce, or what they call the baseball committee, or the baseball authority, every town had one, and convince them that baseball was the way to go. I think at one time they had a convention when 200 people showed up, 15 towns, 200 delegates. It was just a madhouse. Fun. They showed them around. So that's what I wanted to cover today, was the volleyball connection. We can talk about anything else you want to do. Any other questions? Yeah.
To the best of your knowledge, the Babe never barnstormed down there, did he?
Not that I know.
Okay,
Not
just curious.
that I know. Jimmy Fox
Yeah.
did. In fact, there was an interesting series before the second minor league in 1937. There was a team in Cambridge called Phillips Packing, and there's another team in Cambridge called Coca-Cola, and they would always get together at the end of the year to play like 7 games spread out over a period of time. And it would be a championship. So they played one game, and somebody pointed out that half of the Coca-Cola team were minor leaguers, pulled them in from somewhere. So this guy named Colonel Phillips Packard, he had some connections in baseball, so he made a few phone calls, and next thing you know, you had Dickie Porter and I don't know, about 3 or 4 major league guys. So the next game, of course, Coca-Cola put himself, and so does Phillips Packing. They bring in more. So it's building up, and then finally, Phillips says, "The hell with this," and he calls up the Yankees, the owner of the Yankees. He said, "Can you help me out here?" And he said, "Well, you know, Jimmy Fox is getting ready to barnstorm. Why don't you call him up?" So Jimmy Fox showed up one day with a bunch of guys that he was going to barnstorm with. And that was the team that took the field that day. It was not Phillips Packing team. It was,
Right.
and they took a picture, and 2 of them are in minor league uniforms, the rest are in major league uniforms. And you can pick them out, Jimmy Fox and all these other guys that play. It's pretty amazing. Before it was all over, they were drawing 4,000 or 5,000 people to a game. Once a new Jimmy Fox and stuff.
Right.
I have a friend on the Eastern Shore that's the president of the NCAA. And the Negro Leagues, and he had a whole bunch of Negro League players come out to the Eastern Shore. And they had a whole ceremony and put up a statue. The guys were Luther Atkinson, Eddie Banks, Reynold Banks, and George Eccles, Black Diamond.
Is that the one in Snow Hill for Jimmy Johnson?
What was that?
The monument or the marker?
I'm not sure where they had not sure where the statue was, but they had a whole big.
I know a few years ago, the Worcester Historical Society put a marker, the same one that they put up for O'Neill. They went to the same guy and had it done for Jimmy Johnson. Snow Hill. That's probably about 5 years
maybe the same statute field like 5 years ago.
It's not like a statue, it's more like a block, you know, but it's nice, it's really, you've never seen it on meet. And in fact, Newt Weaver did that, he was a Saber member. He was behind that,
Who was?
yeah.
Who was?
Newt Weaver,
Okay.
Mr. Motion said. He was president of the Historical Society. That was his initiative.
Yeah, the Shorebirds had a Negro League Day celebration.
They have one every year. And in
Most
fact,
minor league teams do.
yeah. In fact, I'm going there tomorrow. They're having the induction, and one of the things I want to do is I found like about 8 guys from Maryland that played in the league, so I want to sort of propose to them to have them inducted. So the criteria, part of the criteria is if you ever were in the major leagues, you're sort of automatic. I mean, you have to be nominated, voted on, but played in the major leagues. Now the Negro League considered major. All these guys deserve to be in there. So I don't know what we're going to do with that. I'm going to propose to do something. I don't know what that is.
They put all the Negro League statistics now in the major league.
Yeah. So
that was
That just happened, right?
yeah.
About a year ago, they said they were accepting the Negro League as a major league. But yeah, just recently they said well, now they don't accept all the statistics.
How long did it take you to do this book? I know you told me before.
Well, it took me about a year to write it, research it. I didn't start out researching for a book. I just started.
Just for fun,
after
yeah.
About 30 years.
What made you interested in Eastern Shore?
Well, I grew up, and the minor leagues had just stopped around 1949 last year. I was born in '53, and I grew up in a town that it was Yankee affiliate for off and on for 15 years or so, 10 years. And so I grew up with Yankee fans. I couldn't figure it out for a long time. I would walk around Yankee hats and stuff. Well, you know, they were the Eastern Yankees. And
Where did they play?
they played at Federal Street Park, which in the Eastern.
Oh, Federalsburg?
No. Well, Federalsburg had Federal Park also. It was a popular name for whatever reason. Easton played at Federal Park, and, which I don't know if you know Easton, but it's right off what's the one much called Bay Street. And it's like on the road that goes to St. Michael's. Easton.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, we know a lot of the towns because we live there. So every town that you mentioned, we've been in, you know, with this picture.
And even smaller towns that
Yeah.
had one of the things was, you know, got me was I expected, you know, where you had population on baseball, but I found baseball with no population. Like Crumpton had like 400 people in it. The team was described as a pitcher from Philadelphia, a catcher from Baltimore, and a team from Cotton. So you got a little village of 400 people. Where are they getting the money from? You know, that baseball was like you didn't have an owner, you didn't have a sponsor. The whole town was part. You had ladies auxiliaries, and some years the ladies auxiliary was the main financial source. They raised most of the money.
Did you visit all these towns? Or
Well, most of them, yeah, I've been in at one time or another, and I've grown up there. Some places I didn't even know where they were. Still don't.
and Washington College,
Yes.
supposedly one of the oldest college in Maryland.
Yeah, it's one of the older ones.
They advertise it, you know.
It's got to be the oldest in Maryland. because it was 17, I can't remember, 89 or something. Maine back to Washington, so it had to be around that time. I don't know of anything earlier. I know not St. Mary's was early 1800s. But the rest of them, I don't know when St. John's.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things. Yeah, but I think that's the only other one I would think of.
Yeah, because they started very early.
Yeah.
I don't know when.
Is there a statue of Judy Johnson at Snow Hill?
No, it's not so much a statue, but it's a marker.
Or marker?
But
Okay, I knew they had something there.
You don't, have you seen the one that's up in Neil at the Major League?
Right.
Exact same thing.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
There was one at the Blue Rock Stadium.
There is a Judy Johnson, the Blue Rocks,
Yeah.
Oh, really?
in Wilmington. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't been there in a while.
Vic Willis.
Vic Willis, yeah.
Really?
Did they have one for Vic? Willis? Good for them.
That's what we knew. The Johnson was up before, but then the second time I went,